I had lived in Maplewood Estates for about a year when I learned the hard way just how far Karen was willing to go to enforce her ridiculous HOA rules. From the moment I moved in, she had made herself my personal nightmare. She was the kind of person who thought that the HOA gave her absolute power over every house on the block, even the ones she didn't own. It started with fines for petty violations. $50 for leaving my trash can out 30 minutes too long. $75 because my grass was too tall, even though I mowed it every Saturday. $100 for a non-compliant mailbox, despite it being the same model as everyone else's. I quickly realized that Karen wasn't enforcing rules fairly. She was targeting me. But the real battle didn't begin until she set her sights on my tree. It was a beautiful oak tree, planted decades before I ever moved in. Tall, sturdy, and provided just the right amount of shade in my front yard. It was perfect except to Karen. According to her, it was ruining the uniformity of the neighborhood. "It blocks too much of the sidewalk," she said one day, arms crossed as she glared at it. I sighed. "Karen, it's been here longer than you have." She scoffed. "That doesn't matter. It's a safety hazard. What if a branch falls? What if a child runs into it?" I rubbed my temples. No one is running into my tree. Karen wasn't listening. She had already decided that the tree needed to go. And when I refused to remove it, she took matters into her own hands. It started with threatening letters from the HOA. Each one claimed my tree was a violation of community guidelines. Each time, I responded with a copy of my property deed, proving that the HOA had no authority over it. Then came the petty harassment. I'd wake up to find branches mysteriously cut from my tree, small enough that I couldn't prove anything but obvious enough that I knew Karen was behind it. One night, my security cameras caught her standing in my yard, flashlight in hand, measuring the tree trunk. That was my final straw. I confronted her the next morning. "Karen, stop messing with my tree." She smirked. "I have no idea what you're talking about." I crossed my arms. "I have security footage of you in my yard. That's trespassing." She rolled her eyes. "I was conducting an inspection. The HOA has the right to enforce community standards." I took a slow breath. "Karen, the HOA does not own my property. This tree is staying." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We'll see." That was the last thing she said before walking away. I should have known then. She wasn't done. She was just getting started. A few nights later, I was woken up by the sound of a chainsaw. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Then I heard a loud crack, followed by a deep, echoing crash. I shot out of bed and ran to the window, and what I saw made my jaw drop. My tree, the massive century-old oak, was gone. Or more accurately, it was falling, right onto Karen's house. I rushed outside just in time to hear Karen screaming. The tree had collapsed onto the roof of her house, shattering the second-floor windows and crushing her garage. A broken section of the trunk had landed directly on her car. Her front yard was an absolute disaster. Splintered branches, cracked shingles, shattered glass. Karen stood in the middle of it all, hands in her hair, face red with panic. She turned and saw me standing there. "You!" she shrieked, storming toward me. I barely had time to react before she was in my face, pointing a shaking finger at my chest. "This is your fault." I blinked. "Excuse me?" She gestured wildly at the wreckage. "You knew this tree was dangerous, and you refused to cut it down. You!" I held up a hand, cutting her off. "Karen, let's back up a second. Are you admitting that you cut down my tree?" Her eyes flickered with something, guilt, maybe, before she folded her arms. I didn't cut it down myself. I hired a company." I took a deep breath. "So you're telling me that you hired someone to illegally trespass on my property, chop down a tree that I owned, and now you're mad because it landed on your house?" Karen's face turned purple. "That's not the point," she shrieked. "You should have removed it when I told you to." I let out a slow, deliberate sigh. Then I pulled out my phone. "You know what, Karen?" I said, unlocking it. "Let's get the cops involved." Her eyes went wide. "Wait!" Too late. I had already dialed 911. 20 minutes later, the police arrived. Karen was still ranting when the officers stepped onto her wrecked lawn. One of them, Officer Rodriguez, was a guy I had met before, a good cop who knew how to handle entitled people. He took one look at the scene, raised an eyebrow, and turned to me. "What happened here?" I gestured at Karen. "She hired someone to cut down my tree. It landed on her house." Rodriguez turned to Karen. "Ma'am, is this true?" She froze. Then, with zero shame, she said, "I was enforcing HOA regulations." Rodriguez's face remained blank. "And you had written permission from the homeowner?" Karen scoffed. "I didn't need permission. The tree was a hazard." Rodriguez nodded slowly. Then he reached for his handcuffs. "Ma'am, you just admitted to trespassing and destruction of private property. That's a felony." Karen's entire body stiffened. "Wait, no. This is a misunderstanding." Rodriguez ignored her and turned back to me. "You want to press charges?" I didn't even hesitate. "Yes." Karen screeched as Rodriguez grabbed her wrists and started reading her Miranda rights. "This is illegal. I was doing a public service." Rodriguez sighed. "Ma'am, you destroyed someone else's property, and now you're paying the consequences." As he led her toward the squad car, she turned one last time, eyes filled with pure hatred. "You'll regret this," she spat. I smiled. "You know, I really don't think I will." Then the officer shut the door, and they drove her away. As I stood there, looking at the wreckage, I shook my head. Karen had wanted my tree gone so badly, and now, thanks to her own stupidity, she was the one paying for it. Her house was destroyed. Her car was totaled. And best of all, she was going to jail. I couldn't have planned it better myself. Karen was gone, hauled off in the back of a police car, while her house sat in complete ruins beneath the massive oak tree she had so desperately wanted gone. I stood there, arms crossed, watching as the fire department and emergency services arrived to assess the damage. It was one thing to get arrested. It was another to realize that your own arrogance had literally destroyed your home. One of the firefighters, a guy named Derek, shook his head as he inspected the wreckage. "This is a disaster," he muttered. "Who the hell cuts down a tree without making sure it won't fall on something important?" I smirked. "Apparently, my neighbor." Derek glanced at me. "You the homeowner?" I nodded. "Yep, that was my tree." He let out a low whistle. "Damn. Well, you won't have to pay for this cleanup. Whoever cut this thing down is on the hook for all of it." That was exactly what I wanted to hear, because Karen, she wasn't just going to jail. She was about to go completely broke. The next day, I met with my lawyer to start the process of suing Karen for damages. Between the illegal trespassing, destruction of property, and the sheer cost of cleaning up the mess, the amount was staggering. $85,000. And that was just my side of the claim. The insurance company covering her house was about to hit her with a lawsuit of their own. I wasn't sure what made me happier, the fact that she was getting sued into oblivion, or the fact that she was still sitting in jail while all of this was happening. Speaking of jail, Karen's arraignment hearing was scheduled for the following week. Since she had been arrested on the spot, she hadn't had time to do her usual Karen tricks, complaining to the HOA, whining to her lawyer, or trying to play the victim. Instead, she was sitting in a county holding cell, probably stewing in her own rage. I almost felt bad. Almost. The day of the hearing, I walked into the courtroom and saw Karen sitting at the defendant's table, wearing an orange jumpsuit. Her hair was a mess, her face was blotchy from crying, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked small. Her lawyer, an overworked public defender, was flipping through a file with a resigned expression. He already knew this was a losing case. The judge entered and we all stood. The hearing began. Karen's lawyer did his best to downplay her actions, arguing that she had only wanted to improve the community and never meant for things to go this far. The judge didn't buy it. "You hired a contractor to remove a tree without the homeowner's permission," he said, rubbing his temples. "Then you left the scene before realizing where it would land. That's criminal negligence." Karen sat there, shoulders hunched, eyes darting between the judge and me. I just stared back, waiting for the moment when she would realize just how deep she had dug this hole. And then the judge gave his ruling. Ms. Jennings, you are charged with trespassing, destruction of property, and reckless endangerment. Given the extent of the damages, I am sentencing you to 6 months of probation, 150 hours of community service, and financial restitution to the homeowner. Karen's jaw dropped. Why, you can't be serious, she stammered. This isn't fair. The judge barely looked up. You're lucky I'm not sentencing you to jail time. Karen slumped in her chair, and just like that, she lost. After the hearing, I met with my lawyer again to finalize my lawsuit against Karen. She owed me tens of thousands of dollars for the destruction she caused. The problem? She didn't have that kind of money, so she had 2 choices: try to fight it and lose everything, settle and agree to a payment plan. She picked the second option, which meant she would be paying me for years. Every month, I would get a little check in the mail with her name on it. A constant reminder that she had tried to ruin my life and ended up ruining her own instead. A few weeks later, I saw Karen's house up for sale. Between the fines, the legal fees, and the fact that she couldn't afford to repair the damage, she was forced to sell it. She didn't even stay to pack. A moving company came in, cleared everything out, and within a few days she was gone. No goodbye, no drama, just gone. And the best part? The new homeowners were the nicest people I'd ever met. A young couple, excited to start their lives in the neighborhood. They had zero interest in HOA politics. They just wanted to enjoy their home. And honestly, that was the best ending I could have asked for. Karen was gone. Not just from Maplewood Estates. Not just from the HOA. She was completely erased from the neighborhood she had tried so hard to control. Her house? Sold. Her power? Gone. Her money? Slowly being funneled into my bank account every month as part of her legal settlement. For the first time since I moved in, the neighborhood felt normal. People actually talked to each other instead of worrying about whether they were violating some unwritten HOA rule. There were no more random fines, no more surprise inspections, and best of all, no more Karen. But just when I thought I had seen the last of her, she came back one last time. It was a Saturday afternoon when I spotted a familiar old car creeping down the street. At first, I thought I was seeing things. But then the car stopped in front of my house. And there, sitting in the driver's seat, was Karen. She was wearing sunglasses, like she was trying to disguise herself. But there was no mistaking her. My stomach tightened. What the hell was she doing here? I grabbed my phone and walked outside. Karen immediately looked away, pretending to be interested in something on her dashboard. I knocked on the hood of her car. She flinched, then rolled down her window just a crack. "What are you doing here, Karen?" I asked. She sighed dramatically. "I'm just driving through." I crossed my arms. "Driving through? In a neighborhood you don't live in anymore." She frowned. "I have every right to be here." I raised an eyebrow. "Actually, you don't. The HOA banned you from coming back. Remember?" She tensed. "That was only for board meetings." I smirked. "No, Karen. That was for everything." Her lips pressed into a thin line. I could see it in her face. She wasn't here by accident. She had come back because she couldn't stand losing. She had ruined her life trying to control this neighborhood. And now she was nothing but a visitor. A bitter, unwanted visitor. "You need to leave," I said. She scoffed. "You don't own the road." "No," I admitted. "But I do have security cameras. And if you don't drive away right now, I'll call the cops and let them know you're harassing me again." Her eyes flashed with anger. "Harassing? I'm not even out of my car." I pulled out my phone and held it up like I was already dialing. Her face went pale. "You wouldn't." I grinned. "Oh, I would." She clenched her jaw, gripping the steering wheel like she wanted to run me over. But in the end, she did what she always did when she realized she had lost. She sped off. That was the last time I ever saw her. I don't know where she went. Maybe she found another HOA to terrorize. Maybe she just sat in a small apartment somewhere, stewing in her own failure. It didn't matter, because she would never step foot in this neighborhood again. And me? I enjoyed every single second of my Karen-free life. Karen was gone for good this time. Her final, pathetic drive through the neighborhood had only confirmed what we all knew. She couldn't let go of the power she had lost. But I wasn't thinking about her anymore, because Maplewood Estates had never been better. The HOA was finally reasonable. Neighbors actually enjoyed their homes, and I could finally live in peace without worrying about some insane new rule about trash cans or lawn decorations. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living in a real community. But as much as I wanted to forget about Karen, she had left behind one last mess to clean up. The lawsuit. See, Karen may have been gone, but her legal problems weren't. She was still paying me every month for damages and legal fees after she illegally cut down my tree. But there was another lawsuit brewing, because as soon as her house went up for sale, her insurance company started digging into the case. And what they found, it wasn't good for Karen. One afternoon, I got a call from Greg, the HOA president. "Hey," he said, "I thought you'd want to hear this from me first." I frowned. "What now?" He chuckled. Karen's insurance claim was denied. I blinked. "Wait, what?" Greg sighed. "Yeah, apparently, when she submitted the claim for the tree damage, she lied about what happened." I leaned forward. "Go on." "She told them it was an act of nature, that the tree fell on its own." I couldn't stop laughing. "Are you serious? There's literal evidence that she paid someone to cut it down." Greg chuckled. "Yep, and the insurance company found out. They opened an investigation and discovered your police report, the security footage, and the contractor's statement." I shook my head in disbelief. "So what happens now?" "Well," Greg said, "since her claim was denied, she has to pay for all the repairs out of pocket." I let out a low whistle. That meant Karen was on the hook for tens of thousands of dollars. Between the house damage, legal fees, and restitution, she was probably financially ruined. And it was entirely her own fault. A few weeks later, I got another letter from her lawyer. This time, Karen wasn't suing me. She was begging for a settlement. She wanted to renegotiate her payments because she was completely broke and couldn't afford to keep up with the court-ordered restitution. I read the letter twice. Then I shredded it and told my lawyer to deny any changes. She could pay me every last cent, just like the court ordered. She wanted to ruin my life? Now she got to spend years paying me for her mistakes. A few months after Karen vanished, Maplewood Estates felt like an entirely different place. People actually started helping each other instead of reporting each other for petty violations. The new HOA? Actually useful. They helped organize events, assisted homeowners with projects, and didn't fine people for nonsense like mailbox color. For the first time ever, I actually attended an HOA meeting. Not because I had to defend myself, but because I actually wanted to be there. And that was the biggest victory of all. Karen had spent years controlling everything. And now, without her, the neighborhood was better than ever. Karen was finally gone. Not just from Maplewood Estates, not just from the HOA, but from our lives entirely. Her house? Sold. Her power? Gone. Her money? Draining away every month as she paid me back for damages. For the first time in years, the neighborhood was at peace. But even though Karen was gone, the aftermath of her actions was still being felt. Because as it turned out, Karen had left behind more than just bad memories. She had left behind a legal mess that was about to cost her even more. One afternoon, I got an unexpected call from a lawyer, not mine, but the one representing Karen's former insurance company. First, I thought it was a joke. "Wait," I said, leaning back in my chair. "You're telling me Karen's insurance company is suing her?" The lawyer sighed. "Yes, Ms. Jennings filed a fraudulent claim regarding the tree incident, and after conducting an internal investigation, we've determined that she knowingly misrepresented the cause of the damage." I smirked. "So, in other words, she lied." "Exactly. And now she has to pay for it." "Exactly." I let out a low whistle. "How much are we talking here?" "Well," the lawyer continued, "since she was denied coverage and failed to disclose material facts about the incident, she is now responsible for the full cost of repairs plus legal fees." I grinned. "So how much?" He cleared his throat. Approximately $120,000. I nearly choked on my drink. $120,000. Karen had already been struggling to pay off her debts. Now, she was absolutely ruined. I thought about reaching out to her lawyer, not to help, but just to see how bad things had gotten. But I didn't have to, because a few days later, I got an anonymous email. It was from someone who used to be Karen's friend, and they had some interesting news. Karen wasn't just broke. She was living in a rundown apartment on the other side of town. The house she used to rule like a queen was gone. The HOA she used to control wanted nothing to do with her. She had lost everything, and now she was just another person struggling to get by. I wish I could say I felt bad, that I had some sympathy for her, but I didn't, because Karen had done this to herself. She had spent years making people miserable, forcing them to follow rules that didn't exist, fining people for no reason, trespassing on private property, and ruining lives just because she could. And now, she was finally experiencing what it was like to be powerless. It was poetic justice, and honestly, felt damn good. Karen had spent years terrorizing our neighborhood. Now, she was paying for it in the most poetic way possible. Financial ruin, legal troubles, and complete isolation from the people she once controlled. The news of her insurance lawsuit spread fast. Even people who had moved away from Maplewood Estates years ago heard about it. The woman who had fined people for leaving their trash cans out too long was now drowning in debt. The woman who had patrolled the neighborhood like a dictator was now living in a cramped apartment on the other side of town. The woman who once tried to ruin my life was now spending every last penny trying to fix hers. And the best part? She had no one left to blame but herself. One day, I was sitting on my porch, enjoying my Karen-free life, when I got a call from Greg, the HOA president. "You're going to want to hear this," he said. I leaned back in my chair. "This about Karen?" He chuckled. "Oh yeah. What now?" "Well," he continued, "apparently, she tried to file for bankruptcy to get out of all her debts." I grinned. And, Greg said, clearly enjoying this. "The judge denied her request." I sat up straight. "Wait, what?" "She can't file for bankruptcy because too many of her debts are from lawsuits and court judgments. The court ruled that she still has to pay every single cent." I burst out laughing. Karen had tried to escape the mess she created, just like she always did. But this time, there was no escape. For weeks after that, I kept getting small updates about Karen. She was begging her few remaining friends for money. She had started selling her furniture to cover legal fees. She even tried to apply for a new HOA job in a different neighborhood, but they found out about her past and rejected her. She had lost everything. Her house, her job, her power, her reputation. And the worst part for her? She knew that everyone was laughing at her downfall. One afternoon, I checked my mail and found one last letter from Karen's lawyer. It was a final attempt to negotiate the payments she owed me. A desperate plea to lower the amount. I didn't even read the whole thing. I just smiled, tossed it in the shredder, and went back inside. Karen had spent years making people miserable. Now, she got to experience what it was like to be on the losing side of things, and I had never felt more at peace. Karen was gone. Not just from Maplewood Estates, not just from the HOA. She was completely erased from our lives. The woman who once ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist, who wrote up fake violations, terrorized homeowners, and thought she was above the law, was now just another name on a lawsuit. Her house? Sold. Her power? Stripped away. Her finances? Drained from lawsuits, legal fees, and settlements. And, as I later found out, her new landlord wasn't much kinder than she had been. A few months after Karen left, I got an email from an old neighbor who still kept tabs on her. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. "You're going to love this," the message said. Karen got evicted from her apartment. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. Turns out, she had tried pulling the same HOA nonsense at her new place. Complaining about her neighbors, trying to control things she had no business controlling, sending nasty emails to management. But there was one big difference. This wasn't a neighborhood where she could hide behind an HOA. This was an apartment complex with strict lease agreements. And when Karen pushed too far, the landlord kicked her out. The message included a screenshot of a social media post Karen had written, complaining about how incompetent people are ruining this community, and that she had been unjustly removed from her home. The comments? Absolutely ruthless. People weren't sympathetic. They were laughing, because Karen had finally gotten a taste of her own medicine, and she couldn't handle it. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, and thought about how far she had fallen. Just a year ago, she had been untouchable, using the HOA like a weapon, harassing people just because she could. Now, she was homeless, her reputation destroyed, and nobody, not the HOA, not the neighborhood, not even her new apartment complex, wanted anything to do with her. And the best part? I didn't have to do anything. Karen had ruined herself. A few weeks later, I was walking through the neighborhood when I saw the new homeowners who had moved into Karen's old house. They were outside, setting up lawn chairs, chatting with neighbors, actually enjoying themselves. They waved me over. "Hey," the husband said. "I don't think we've officially met yet. I'm Dan. This is my wife, Rachel." I shook their hands. "Nice to meet you. You settling in okay?" "Oh, absolutely," Rachel said, smiling. "This place is amazing. Everyone's been so welcoming." I smirked. "Yeah. It's a much better neighborhood these days." They laughed, completely unaware of the nightmare that had once lived in their house. And I wasn't about to tell them, because Karen, she was the past. The neighborhood had moved on, and so had I.